Study group time, which means that we are going to read and I'm going to comment and give you whatever I understand and my experience and any tricks and tips that can help you to kind of utilize the material that we are going to be going through and studying. So that's what a study group is for. So, hey, Cassidy. Hello. Hello. Hey, June. Hi, sweetheart. It's interesting because at some point in the last hour, the name June was coming up in my mind with one of the people, and I was like, I don't think that's in Jan or June, and I was trying to figure it out. So maybe it was a message for you. I don't know. We'll see. So all right, guys. So it's study group time. So I'm gonna give you guys a chance to get in here for the studying. Hey, Ray. Hey, Ray. All right. So I would love to talk about some of this stuff just as like a conversation. So if any of you want to come on video to talk about this stuff or just go into like spiritual topic questions, like I'm totally down for that, just so y'all know. So I'm totally down for that. It's Bible study. You know what, right? It's hysterical. Like, even though I don't consider myself to be a Christian or a Catholic anymore, I have more Bibles than the average person. Like, it's kind of an obsession. I think I have like 7 or 8 of them now at this point. So it's ridiculous how many Bibles I have. So I was like, okay, for someone who ain't a Christian or a Catholic, I sure do have a hell of a lot of Bibles. So it's just funny. But if y'all want to come on, hey Jelly, so if y'all want to come on and discuss the topics, spiritual topics, or whatever we're gonna be reading, feel free to like request it, just because I would love to, just because I feel like the need to interact or communicate in that way. But we'll get started here. So we're doing this is the book we're reading, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, Waking into Your Life's Purpose. For those of you who are following along, we are on page 101. Conscious suffering. But yeah, FYI. So I'm going to start. So I was just thinking how much these sessions feel like Bible study. Oh my God. Yeah. I am like obsessed. Like, I have an obsession with reading like the ancient stories and like digging for like the more accurate versions of these old stories. Like on my phone, one of my books, like it's all the Gospels. It's called the 5 Gospels, but it's based on the 4 canonical Gospels. And so I prefer the Gospel of Mark, just because the Gospel of Mark, if you go to some of the original versions or the original before they were translated, they kind of they share a version of Jesus in a way that is so relatable. It's kind of hysterical, like what he says to people when they're just like not getting what he's talking about. And so the book that I have, which is called the 5 Gospels, a bunch of these scholars and translators, they went back to the earliest versions of the Gospels, and then what they did was most of the earlier versions were in Greek, because back then, even though Jesus spoke Aramaic because he was Jewish, even though he spoke Aramaic, the Gospels were written in Greek because they were writing them for a Greek audience, because they were trying to get people who were Greek, who were not Jewish, to join the movement. And so they were working on that. And so they ended up, so one of the book that I'm reading, which I love, they went back to some of the earliest versions of the original Gospels, and then they went back to before they were translated, and then they retranslated them because back then when they originally were translated, and then you have all these other versions, I think there's like 800 and something different versions of the Bible based on translations and different like religious denominations. But when you go back to some of the earliest Gospels that appeared, that are the oldest, like actual physically old, and then you retranslate them in a way where we know so much more about language and about what some words meant versus others. People still think that Jesus was a carpenter. Jesus was not a carpenter. He was a tech, which was a word that represented stonemason. So he was those guys in the Home Depot parking lot looking for a job, and they're day laborers. That's what he was. He was pretty much a day laborer. So he was a tech, but they were stonemasons. They weren't carpenters. And the reason why is because the area that they occupied in ancient Judea doesn't have a lot of trees. There aren't enough trees to sustain enough of a economy. They dealt with stone. Stone is what they preferred to build with, and most of the people were educated who built were stonemasons or stone builders. And so if they had trees or if they were going to use wood, they would have to have that imported. Now, granted, Jesus has an uncle. His name was Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea was actually a very wealthy man. He's the tomb that they put Christ in when he was, taken off the cross. And then they used Joseph's tomb because he was a wealthy man. But he sold tin. He had like an entire tin industry up and down, like all the way to Greece, all the way down to India. So he would travel quite a bit. And so Jesus had opportunities to experience like higher knowledge and stuff through his uncle, because his uncle pretty much hooked him up, but he still had to deal with like the everyday life to where he lived at and where they lived at, which I think it was Capernaum. It was like maybe 4 or 5 miles where they lived at in Nazareth. It was just like 4 or 5 miles away from like the major city center, which was it's Caesarea. I think it was Caesarea. But they would travel like for work and stuff like that. But they dealt with stone. They didn't really deal with like wood, because that would have to be imported. And even the wealthy people of the time still preferred stone over wood. Not only that, but stone lasts longer than wood, so it's the preferred thing to use to build structures and such. So that's what they were actually versed in. But when you go back and you read the oldest versions of these gospels and actually follow along with a more accurate translation, oh my God, it is like hysterical. Like Jesus was a bitch. Like he was not, I almost refer to Jesus as a she, because she had attitude. She was not playing around with these fools. She's like, like, why are you so dense? Like, this is not that different. Like he was like, I'm like, holy shit. Like you're really digging into these folks, but it's hysterical because it's obvious he knew what he was doing and he knew a lot more than what they did. But just some of the things some of the ways that he would express himself, but it's very like street talk. In other words, when you look at like the older versions of the Gospels after they were translated, because they were translated from Greek, they're very embellished. And the reason why is because they were catering to a Greek audience. And the Greeks were much more educated. They had much more opportunity than the Jewish people in ancient Judea. And so people in Rome, they just were more versed. So think of it this way. Like if you have someone from the hood talking hood, some of these folks who live in their little mansions don't follow along because they're like, oh, they're ghetto, so they don't really feel that connection. But if you take that person's words and you change it into something that is like, first class education, then at that point it changes the way that it sounds. And then these people who have money are definitely wanting to be involved and wanting to like buy into the messages. And so that's what happened. So they designed the Gospels for a Greek audience, a Greek speaking audience, which is why they were originally written in Greek. Even though there are other Syriac and Coptic Gospels that are also just as old, that kind of changed a little bit and do a little bit of a spin with the way it was. But when you go back to like some of the Gospels, the first one was Mark, even though Mark comes in second, usually whenever people talk about the Gospels, but Mark was actually the oldest Gospel. And if you look at it, there's no like story about his nativity or how the Virgin Mary got pregnant or, how a virgin became pregnant. There's nothing about that. There's nothing included in that about what happened after he died and like all the heavens and everything opened up. Nothing to do with that. There are some interesting things in the gospel that are very mysterious and miraculous, but it just focuses on when he was baptized with John. Starts off there, just like out of nowhere, like doesn't even talk about his childhood, doesn't even talk about his youth, just talks about, hey, Jesus showed up, he got baptized by John, and he started his ministry. That's pretty much what it does. And then it tells you like what he had to go through, and people went crazy for him because the moment that people realized that he could help them or heal, or that he could see the future and he could describe things that he should know, people just were like, whoa, like what the hell? And so they were caught off guard. And he didn't really get the recognition. I'm talking about Jesus. I guess I'm talking about Jesus, right? So he didn't get the recognition so much where he was raised or around his family. And he even talks about it. He's like, my family, like you're never going to, he even says like prophets are not recognized by their own family or their own community. They never get the recognition they deserve. So it's usually elsewhere. And it even there's even stories that show like the people in his community just didn't think that like this is Mary's son, like Mary's son, which was a derogatory thing to say, because when in those days, if you refer to a boy as the son of the mother, it automatically sent a message out that this male, their father, that they were not married. And so that automatically is the way that they refer to him, is that Mary's son, not Joseph's son, Mary's son, but then they changed it in later gospels. But it's just interesting, like all the little things and what he had to put up with. Like in one instance, he was like tired and he was done with trying to help people because the crowds kept getting larger and larger and he felt overwhelmed. And so he kept trying to go off and like be on his own and like have privacy to be able to meditate and to be able to do what he needed to do. But in one instance, like these people, he was home, people found out that he was home, and then they started showing up to his home in Capernaum and at the time, and he wouldn't answer the door because he was exhausted. He was done. He was like done. And so at one point, these people, they opened up a portion of the top of the roof of the home, and they lowered a guy who was paraplegic into the house and asked if he could help him. And he's just like, wow, like y'all have some guts, y'all have some balls to do this. Okay. And so he helped the guy. But it was just interesting, like all the crazy things that he had to deal with. But I just love it. I love reading it, and I love reading it in a way where it's definitely more, it sounds and it seems extremely more accurate than what you hear today, where you have it was designed for a Greek audience and they had a lot more words and vocabulary to use for their writings. So I love it. So that's just the way that I am, right? Okay, so let's go over. Actually, I want to read you one. You know what? I'll read this in a second, but I kind of want to read you a story because I was reading that this morning, some of the stories, and one of them really, it's like a lot of them are just really funny to follow along with. But I'll like give you an example of like how Jesus was a bitch. Like he was not playing. He was like, nope, like we ain't gonna do this. So here, let me see if I can get up a good example here. Okay, let's see. Go in this one. Okay, how's it? Let's see. Get a good one. That's about him. Okay, let's see. Because there's one where he's going off on like the priests, which I really thought it was hysterical. And I was like, ooh, you digging into those folks. Like you are not playing with them. Okay. Here's one. So, this is the retranslated from scholars who are like translators who spent their lives studying this language, and these are the latest understanding of these languages and what they actually meant, like tic-tac, which again, like people would think that Jesus was a carpenter, and that's not what it meant. It meant that he was a day laborer and he worked with stone. But they just immediately, because in Rome they definitely had more trees and such, so it depends on where you're at and where you're basing the language at. But he was a stonemason. He wasn't like a freaking like carpenter. But this is one of the things that he's going off, because the Pharisees, by the way, the Pharisees at the time when Jesus was around, because he was considered a rabbi, he was considered a spiritual teacher of that church, which was the Jewish church, right? And so the Jewish temple, which was in Jerusalem, there were the Pharisees, who were like the middleman between the people who were the top heads who lived at the temple or were very much connected to what's going on in the temple. Then you have the Pharisees, who were more interactive with people out in the streets and who were more connected. But they were very intelligent, the Pharisees. They spent a lot of time in their studies, and it would take years. And back in those days, the old ways, they used to be born into those positions, or they used to be trained from childhood to be these positions, these roles. And so over time, they started to just accept anybody, and they were not as picky with who they would bring into these communities, into these roles. So a lot of these individuals, like the priests of their day, consider them the priests. So you've got, the Temple of Jerusalem, consider that to be the Vatican, or like the Pope, just as for example. It's not the same religion, completely different religions, but as an example. And then you have the Pharisees, which were the priests, the people who basically dealt, the individuals who were in more of the communities. So he says, and he got right into the boat with his disciples and went to the Dalmotha district. The Pharisees came out and started to argue with him, to test him. They demanded a sign in the sky. He groaned under his breath. Jesus groaned under his breath and says, why does this generation insist on a sign? I swear to God, no sign will be given this generation. So that's what he said based on the more accurate translation. But I mean, it sounds pretty obvious. Like he was already catching an attitude with the priest, and he's like, y'all don't need a sign to know that I'm this, holy person, or that I have these abilities, or that I can do what I can do. You don't need a sign. And because of this, you're not going to get any signs at this point. So, but the fact that he says, I swear to God, like, it's just hysterical. So like little things like that. So I thought it was hilarious. And turning his back on them, he got back in the boat and crossed over to the other side. They forgot to bring any bread and had nothing with, and then it goes into like some other things with all of this other stuff. So that's one example of this, which I appreciated from the story. There's another one. Let's see. There's another one. Let me see if I can find another one that's really funny. Oh, here's a good one. I was like, ooh, girl. I was like snapping my fingers when I read it, because I was like, oh, girl, you're digging into these folks. You're trying to explain. You're trying to Christ-plain to them. So here's another one. Okay. Okay, so the Pharisees gather around him along with some of the scholars who had come from Jerusalem. When they noticed some of his disciples eating their meal with defiled hands, meaning that they didn't wash their hands before they ate. They just ate with dirty hands. So when they noticed some of his disciples eating their meals with defiled hands, that is to say, without washing their hands, you see the Pharisees and the Judeans generally wouldn't think of eating without first washing their hands in a particular way, always observing the tradition of the elders. And which I can understand that, because we already know just by there's just scientific understanding that when you don't wash your hands, you have germs, and so if you're going to go out and deal with people, shake hands, etc., you get germs on your hands, and if you don't wash them, then you can probably contaminate yourself or get sick, so it would make sense that the elders at that time automatically, it was a law or a rule that you needed to wash your hands before you ate, which would make sense, because if you're, Moses, and you're trying to maintain a society, and you got a bunch of people getting sick because they got E. coli or something, let me make a law that says wash your damn hands before you eat. And so it becomes a tradition, which becomes then like a law and a practice. So, just so you know, the mindset. So I don't just think, oh, well, they're bad for going against Christ. But at the same time, people who were poor, who lived, in squalor, didn't have the luxury of being able to wash and bathe themselves on a regular basis. So the idea of going and finding water every single time they were going to do something was more of a challenge, and it wasn't much more difficult for them. And so that's just, so you go out into the community and you find a bunch of homeless people, and then you try to feed them and tell them and get after them because they didn't wash their hands before they ate. Come the fuck on, right? So no. So going back to what he said, so you see the Pharisees and the Judeans generally wouldn't think of eating without first washing their hands in a particular way, always observing the tradition of the elders, and they won't eat when they get back from the marketplace without washing again. And there are many other traditions they cherish, such as the washing of cups and jugs and kettles, which we understand is food safety, right? Okay. The Pharisees and the scholars start questioning Jesus. Why don't your disciples live up to the tradition of the elders instead of eating bread with defiled hands? And Jesus answers, and he answered to them, how accurately Isaiah depicted you phonies when he wrote, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts stay far away from me. Their worship of me is empty because they insist on teachings that are human commandments. You have set aside God's commandment and hold fast to human tradition. Or he would say to them, how expert you've become at putting aside God's commandments to establish your own tradition. For instance, Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and those who curse their father or mother will surely die. But you say, if people say to their father or mother, whatever I might have spent to support you is korban, which means consecrated to God, you no longer let those persons do anything for their father or mother. So you end up invalidating God's word with your own tradition, which you then perpetuate, and you do all kinds of other things like that. So what he's basically telling them is like, hey, you want people to follow the law that says honor your mother and your father, because that's what the law commands. But then you require those people to put you, the Pharisees, you, the religious leaders, and what they have to offer, what the money that they would use to take care of their family, to take care of their father and their mother, you instead expect them to give that money to you, which then causes them to defile themselves and to go against the commandments. So you put your own needs ahead of the commandment. But the commandment is that they should be using that for their mother and their father. And y'all do all kinds of crazy, shady shit like that. So pretty much is what he's saying to them. But it was just like, I was like, ooh, girl. And I read that and I was like, ooh. And I was like, no, man. I was like, he put them into their place. So it's funny. But I get a kick out of like reading and watching him interact with these people, and then like just basically cut them a new one, because they act fools and they think that they're the authority, but their authority supersedes God, is what he's saying. Like, your authority precedes God. No, like quite the opposite. You should be helping these people to achieve the authority that the commandments require, not necessarily put yourself before the commandments. So it's funny. So that's just an example. So thought y'all would enjoy that, because I was like reading that. But it's really short though. Like the Gospel of Mark, especially when you go back to like the five Gospels, it's really short, but it's good. It's good. All right, so let's get back to the book, because we are reading this, right? And I just wanted to share that, because that was just something out of something I read this morning. And I was just like, oh my goodness, and I was like laughing my ass off. I was like, she is not playing with these folks. All right, conscious suffering. If you have young children, give them help, guidance, and protection to the best of your ability. But even more important, give them space to be. They come into this world through you, but they are not yours. The belief, I know what's best for you, may be true when they are very young, but the older they get, the less true it becomes. The more expectations you have of how their life should unfold, the more you are in your mind instead of being present for them. Eventually, they will make mistakes, and they will experience some form of suffering. As all humans do, in fact, they may be mistakes only from your perspective. What to you is a mistake may be exactly what your children need to do or experience. Give them as much help and guidance as you can, but realize that you may also at times have to allow them to make mistakes, especially as they begin to reach adulthood. At times, you may also have to allow them to suffer. Suffering may come to them out of the blue, or it may come as the consequence of their own mistakes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could spare them all suffering? No, it wouldn't. They would not evolve as human beings and would remain shallow, identified with the external form of things. Suffering drives you deeper. The paradox is that suffering is caused by the identification with form and erodes identification with form. A lot of it is caused by the ego, although eventually suffering destroys the ego, but not until you suffer consciously. Humanity is destined to go beyond suffering, but not in the way the ego thinks. One of the ego's main erroneous assumptions, one of its many deluded thoughts, is, I should not have to suffer. Sometimes the thought gets transferred to someone close to you. My child should not have to suffer. That thought itself lies at the root of suffering. Suffering has a noble purpose, the evolution of consciousness and the burning up of the ego. The man on the cross is an archetypal image. He is every man and every woman. As long as you resist suffering, it is a slow process, because the resistance creates more ego to burn up. When you accept suffering, however, there is an acceleration of that process, which is brought about by the fact that you suffer consciously. You can accept suffering for yourself, or you can accept it for someone else. such as your child or parent. In the midst of conscious suffering, there is already the transmutation. The fire of suffering becomes the light of consciousness. The ego says, I shouldn't have to suffer. And the thought makes you suffer so much more. It is a distortion of the truth, which is always paradoxical. The truth is that you need to say yes to suffering before you can transcend it. Conscious parenting. Many children harbor hidden anger and resentment towards their parents, and often the cause is inauthenticity in the relationship. The child has a deep longing for the parent to be there as a human being, not as a role, no matter how conscientiously that role is being played. You may be doing all the right things and the best you can for your child, but even doing the best you can is not enough. In fact, doing is never enough if you neglect being. The ego knows nothing of being, but believes you will eventually be saved by doing. If you are in the grip of the ego, you believe that by doing more and more, you will eventually acclimate enough doings to make yourself feel complete at some point in the future. You won't. You will only lose yourself in doing. The entire civilization is losing itself in doing that is not rooted in being and thus becomes futile. How do you bring being into the life of a busy family, into the relationship with your child? The key is to give your child attention. There are two kinds of attention. One we might call form-based attention. The other is formless attention. Form-based attention is always connected some way with doing or evaluating. Have you done your homework? Eat your dinner, tidy up your room, brush your teeth, do this, stop doing that, hurry up, get ready. What's the next thing we have to do? This question pretty much summarizes what family life is like in many homes. Form-based attention is, of course, necessary and has its place, but if that's all there is in the relationship with your child, then the most vital dimension is missing, and being becomes completely obscured by doing, by the cares of the world, as Jesus puts it. Formless attention is the separable form, the dimension of being. How does it work? As you look at, listen to, touch, or help your child with this or that, you are alert, still completely present, not wanting anything other than the moment as it is. In this way, you make room for being. In that moment, if you are present, you are not a father or mother. You are the alertness, the stillness, the presence that is listening, looking, touching, even speaking. You are the being behind the doing. I'll stop there because I was talking for a while and I want to answer y'all's questions. So I'll stop there. But I'll stop there because I want to give you an example, kind of an experience. So like with my sister, my younger sister, she's my middle sister. My youngest sister, that's a different story. But my middle sister, with her, at the beginning, like I again tried to control her. Or I tried to tell her how to live her life, or try to direct her in how to live her life, and that didn't work. And so I had to make the decision to trust my guides, who had told me at the time that I needed to be her friend, not her dominator, not her father. She had a father. I didn't need to be her father. I needed to be her friend. And so I changed strategies, and instead of telling her what to do, because she was really struggling during her 13, 14 years, instead of telling her what to do and trying to control her or trying to cause her to become the version of who I thought she should be in my mind, I just accepted where she was at that point, and I decided to just be her friend and offer a sounding board and just any guidance or support I could at the time. And in doing so, I gave her permission to be herself for the very first time. Because before that, she was always trying to achieve or accomplish things through school or through her activities. And after my uncle passed away, the uncle who raised her as a father, she went into grief and she just stopped caring. And then she started to just struggle, and everything was turned upside down. And so doing so, it gave her an opportunity. I gave her the opportunity to just start to be a version of herself that she chose, versus me telling her who she should be or how she should be. And in doing so, I think I gave her the greatest gift in that, because I think that was the first taste of freedom she ever really had. Even though our living situation at the time was not ideal, we were three of us living in a 1-bedroom apartment, my mom, my sister, and I, and we were poor. So, but it gave her a taste of freedom in a way where she was in control of her own destiny. And even like a few months ago, I was talking to her, because she's achieved a lot in her life, and I'm very proud of her. And I told her that I was very proud of her, and she said, and she thought I was talking about being proud of her because of what she achieved. And I said, no. I said, I've always been proud of you for what you achieve. That's not what I'm proud of you for in this moment that I'm talking about this. What I'm proud of is the fact that you don't need me. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, I made a promise to myself that I was going to help you get to a place in your life where you didn't need me and you would be fine without me. And that was the goal. The goal wasn't to control your life, turn you into something that you weren't. The goal was just to help you to become a strong, independent person so you don't need me. And that way you will be okay no matter what. So even if I'm not here, you're going to be fine, because that was my focus. That was my target. And she could tell she was like really she appreciated me saying that, because she didn't think about that. I was like, yeah, we can achieve a lot of things in our life, titles, roles, achievements, etc. But when you achieve independence, or the ability to be self-reliant, so that you don't have to constantly depend on people for things or for support. You don't have to depend on society for those things. I mean, when you get to a point where you can just give yourself what you need and you don't need anybody else for anything, you can still rely on others, but it's not necessary. So anything past our own self-reliance is a cherry. It's the cherry on the cake. It's the extra. And so that's what it's about. It's about getting to a point where you don't need anybody. You can do your own thing and be your own person. Not everybody can do that. I understand that. But for the most part, if you can get to a place where you can be self-reliant so that everything else is extra, then you can really appreciate life, and you won't live from a state of fear or from a state of constant anxiety that you are gonna, fail, or that something isn't gonna work out for you. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And I know that if something goes wrong tomorrow, I will bounce back and I will be fine, and possibly even better, just because that is who I am. And that's how I know myself to be. And I've seen myself do that over and over and over again. But I taught myself how to do that. I had to learn that the hard way. So what I gave my sister was the benefit of what I gained for myself, and gave her the same ability and skills so that she can do that for herself. So I have zero worry that she will be fine in this world if I'm gone tomorrow, because she has everything she needs to be fine. And I know that she's going to be fine. So that was the goal. That was what I was focused on with her. All right, so going over here. So snappity snap. And we still ended up with Typhoid Mary, because people don't want to change to say well. To Typhoid Mary. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? You're talking about the dirty hands. Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? I love Sassy Jesus too. Yeah, I love Sassy Jesus. I'm like, where has this person been? Because the person that I learned about in church ain't this person that I'm reading about right now. And it definitely changes the spin, because all of the individuals in my life who I have appreciated or looked up to have that same snappy, hey, it's like that no nonsense attitude, which is what I try to embody myself. That no nonsense attitude of look, let's get real, because, taking the Mary Poppins route to helping you with your problems is obviously not working. So let's get real, So it's like, and it's funny because I have a friend, and I gave my friend some advice and they didn't take it. And so I was like, that's okay. And so then they made a decision that did not line them up with what they were trying to achieve. And I'm not talking about you, Ray, just so you know, because I was like, what is he talking about me? No, girl, I ain't talking about you. I'm talking about somebody else. But I gave them advice. I told them what they needed to do. And they said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then the time came, and they wasted that time on something that had nothing to do with nothing. And so then they reached out, and they're like, hey, so I got these signs from the universe. And I was like, those aren't signs from the universe. I gave up on trying to give you advice because you obviously don't take it. And so you needed a swift kick in the ass from the universe to let you know that this is where your attention should be. And so because you decided to waste your time doing all these other goddamn things that have nothing to do with nothing, and then you want to cry and bitch at the end of the day that you're not happy. Well, it's your own damn fault that you're not happy, because you didn't do what the universe is trying to help you to do. So whose fault is it? Yours or the universe and lives and circumstances? It's your fault, because you didn't do what you were guided to do on multiple occasions. So I know I sounded like a complete bitch when I just said that, but at the same time, You didn't listen, and being nice didn't work. So let me be a bitch about it. And so but I love him. I want him to do well, and he's gonna do fine. He'll do fine. But he's just slowly getting there. And I'm just like, oh, like he's one of those people where I'm just like, look, this is where you have to be. This is where you are. This is what you need to do to get to this point, not this over here. But they do this over here, and I'm just like, oh, bitch. And I'm going to grab this one, and I throw your ass over there. Like, get your ass over there. Now, sit your ass down. You do that. You do that for 4 fucking hours. And then you can bitch about life not working out for you, because at least you did something that aligned you with what you wanted to achieve. And that was the focus. That was the goal. So, but he's going to do fine. He's going to get there. He's going to take him a little bit longer. But that, sometimes you have to do tough love sometimes. And that's what I loved about reading those, the Gospels, was that Jesus was like a tough lover. Like he's like, no, this is the problem, folks. Listen up, because you're not hearing what I have to say. So, him saying like, all those who have ears, let them hear. That was not like this like magical way of saying like you have to have special ears. That was his way of saying, open your damn ears and hear what I have to say. And then he went into his story. So that's what he was saying in like modern terms. But people want to like twist it into like, some other, I'm like, no. Like he was being very, very direct to the point. People didn't take it as that. So. Yeah, it was like spiritual. I guess psychic tough love or spiritual tough love, because I'm also a spiritual teacher. So spiritual tough love, I guess you can say. Oh, the name of the book. The book that I'm reading, this is the book. The book was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. That's the book. So that's the one we're working on today. And then on Fridays we do The Secret. So, but after I'm done with one of these books, I'm going to change out one of the days so that I am doing like what I just did with the Jesus story. Like I give a story from something that we can all identify with, and then go back, dissect it, break it down, and then kind of go into a topic about that. So I'm thinking of doing something like that instead, just because I really, I think that a lot of people have a lot to say, but they don't say much, and I think a lot of people have opinions, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And I think a lot of people think they're spiritual or think that they're doing something in a very spiritually, positive way. But they ain't spiritual. They don't even understand what the relevance of spirituality is. They assume like, oh, I'm a Christian. I'm like, no. That's like a religion. We're talking about spirituality. Spirituality transcends religion. Spirituality is your opportunity to connect with your higher, deeper form of yourself that exists beyond the religious books. Those religious books are just very specific pairs of glasses. All those books are glasses that you put on, and they allow you to see things in a certain way. They don't technically allow you to see all things in its purest form. And so people who think that religion is the end all be all, well, you're just cutting yourself off from your highest self and from the truth of the more truths that are past the dogma of religious ideology and a lot of the politicalness of religious beliefs that are based back when religion, the different religions started. So, let me see. We'll go through here. Good. So go here. Remember, spiritual questions, y'all. No psychic reading. So we're only doing study group and spiritual topical questions. So personal readings. Yeah, you can get, Jessica, you can get the book from, I got it from Amazon. You can get an ebook. You don't even have to buy a physical book. I love books. I always I have tons of, let me show you. I got tons of books. See, it's got some there, and then I got all of those there. So I got tons of books. But the reason why is because I love books, and one of my vision board pictures was of me having this large library of all of these spiritual and ancient texts and books that I could study and I could use as ways of understanding things further, so I can pass that along to people. So that was one of my vision board things. So I'm building it up. But if I upgrade to a larger house, I might end up buying more books. So we'll see. But I would like to have books like wall to wall, and like the pinche ladder that comes down that you can like roll with getting the book that you want. And then I can be like Belle from like Disney's movie, like what is it? Like what is the song? How'd she go? How'd she do it? She was like, little town, it's a quiet village every day like the one before. So like that, like I want to sing the Belle song on the pinche ladder. Like that's what I want to do. But that's just me. That's how I roll. And then I want to have one of those like, I don't know what they're called. They're like these beautiful chairs that kind of have like that rolling like one side and then it kind of like goes out, so I can like lay there like Rose from Titanic, but I'm reading a book. Oh, I'm just reading a book. Like that's like part of my vision thing for like the scene of the library that I want to have. So it's a dedicated library. It's not like an office and a library. It's a dedicated library. So that's what I want. So yeah, everybody keeps asking me for any suggested reading list. So, oh my God, I have read a lot of books, but I also have a lot of books I have to read. And I can narrow it down to like a handful. At the same time, as I'm learning more and as I'm experiencing more directly from source with my own personal experiences, I am finding that some of the material that I thought was incredible, like the book The Secret, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I thought that book was like it. Today, I'm like, it's like a freaking lighthouse. It's like the lighthouse. It's like a Jehovah's Witness pamphlet. That's what it reminds me of, because it's like just to the point. It like breaks it down into like easy terms for people, but it doesn't really give you enough depth to understand it in real world situations. It only talks about these like ideal stories and ideal situations of how things worked out. None of the nuances of like actually getting there. And I don't like that. And that was the reason why, when you think of Jerry and Esther Hicks and Abraham, why they pulled out of the original film, because they felt it was too simple and it was like a dumbed down version of law of attraction and manifestational understanding. And so it was dumbed down, and they wanted to give people more of an understanding. So, and when you go into the Abraham material, it is definitely next level like stuff. So it takes it to the complete next level. But I've been, but it's just like, but it's still a very usable book, because for people who did not spend all the time reading the stuff that I've read, they don't know all of the other things that I know. So for them, reading something like The Secret would definitely help tremendously, which is why I still use it, because just because, I upgraded to a freaking motorcycle, or a flying car, doesn't necessarily mean that I don't appreciate the basic beach bicycle, because you can still get somewhere with that. And so that's how I see it. I see it as something that can get people somewhere, but it's a whole nother level when you realize and you really can get the most out of that. And so that's the way that I feel. But I've actually been channeling a lot more. I've been doing a lot more channeling with Aja, and Aja has been communicating a lot more. So because right now I just was working on my book yesterday, and I was finishing up or completing parts of chapter 4, and every chapter is dedicated to certain things with my first book, which is psychic. But then my second book, initially I was going to create a second book that was going to be called mediumship or spirit communication. Then there was going to be a third book about like channeling. But then I feel like I'm being pushed to write a spiritual book for my second one. So the first one's just about psychic ability, which means I might have to incorporate some of the spiritual stuff I wanted to in the first book. So then the second book would be about spirituality, understanding things from a very spiritual perspective and not from a religious perspective. And then using experiences and examples from my life to help you understand these same things within your life. But I've been talking to Aja, and I've been channeling, and Aja has been, I asked Aja a while ago, I was like, because someone said, the law of attraction is just one law. There are many laws. And I was like, really? And I was like, okay, what are the other, what is this going to open, or is this going to not open? Hold on, I'm trying to open this because I wanted to show you guys what I was talking about. Oops. It's not opening it for me. Interesting. I was like, am I not supposed to share this yet? Because it's in my notes, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Oh, force, quit. Oh, I hope I didn't quit everything. And then the video. Okay, there it goes. Okay. So opening this back up. There it goes. Okay. So I was writing down some of these. And so I've been, every time they download it into my brain, I have to get my notepad out and I start typing out everything that they want me to. Sometimes my partner will come into the bedroom. He's like, what are you doing standing there? I'm like, I'm writing out my thought. I need to write this down because it is really complex and it's not the easiest thing to understand. And if I don't write it out, I'm going to lose it. And then I miss an opportunity to pass on this to somebody else. And a little insight into my daily experience, but I've been getting back into more channeling with Aja because there was a period of time there where I wasn't up to it. And Aja's been dictating some information to me. And I asked Aja a while ago, because someone had said that there was more than one law. Law of attraction is one of them, but there are many laws. And I was like, okay, what are the laws? And I didn't get an answer at that time, but now I've been getting more answers. So here's an example of what I've been getting. So one of the things, this is divine realizations. Love is known in two formats: the substance that binds all of creation as a collaborative expression of conscious awareness, and the emotional experience which represent aspects of the existence of this substance. Love is an emotionless substance, but it is known through emotional opportunities of human love. In other words, love itself, the purest form of love, we can't comprehend that in this form. There's just no way we can comprehend it in this form. We get glimpses of it, but love is the binding force of all of creation. It exists within all things, within all structures, within all levels of creation. But it is not technically an emotional thing. It is what it is. So when we're in spirit form or in an ascended form, our understanding of love is very different. In human form, we only get glimpses of what this love is like, and we experience it through our emotions because our emotions help us to connect and understand the existence of this substance. And so the love that we experience with each other in relationships and with connections, that's just a glimpse of the truest form of this substance we know as love that actually binds all things together. So that's one thing that I was channeling. But I asked about the laws, and Aja was like, okay, there's many laws. And so I started putting them all down. So there's the law of free will, the law of influence, the law of attraction and synchronicity. So the law of attraction is actually the law of synchronicity, is how it's being shared to me. The law of integration, the law of oneness, the law of self-realization and awakening, the law of perspective, the law of experiential alignment, the law of duality, the law of cyclical and repeating patterns, the law of contradiction, the law of unified reality, integrity. So they're very complex ideas and laws that I have to go in and break down and explain because there's very specific examples of this that I was given. So I have to go back over every single one and then write down each example, like the law of influence, for example. Actually, let's start with the law of free will. When you think of the law of free will, we already know, from the Bible and all that stuff, God gave man free will. Well, no, it's a little more complex than that. In other words, the moment that we came into this body and into this form, automatically we have the right to choose what we desire. We have the right to choose, period. So life is not forcing us to do anything. We can either make the decision, we can either make a choice, or we can cast blame on others. But at the end of the day, even if we blame other people for whatever happens, we're still responsible for all of it. So there's the law of free will. So our will is what we are given, we have by default. Nobody can force you to do anything unless you choose to submit. And so the law of free will is very much focused on our choice, our power of choice in all that we do in this world. But then there's also the law of influence. You got a bunch of people running around thinking that if I cast a curse on someone else, they're going to do what I want them to do. There is a law against that actually happening, which means there is a law which is called it's the law of free will, but also the other side of that is the law of influence, which means that one individual in this body, in this form, cannot force by will or by any magical process, cannot force another human being to do anything that they do not accept, submit to, or choose. It is still a choice at the end of the day. But you got a bunch of people who are like casting curses and like trying to like force people to do this or to do that. I'm like, if that were the case, then we'd have a lot of people who are in the public eye doing a lot of the things that we want them to do automatically because we're casting curses and, doing spells and stuff. If you had the ability to force another human being to do anything because you threw a bunch of herbs in a pot, then you would have, people who like Donald Trump, you'd be having Donald Trump drop dead and not being alive because you have enough people wishing for his death when all of that was going on and even to this day. So that's just one example. So you can't force another human being to do anything that they do not choose for themselves. With that being said, there is the law of influence, which is you can use your will to influence another. And you can do so in such a way that that person chooses to believe that they don't have willpower, that they don't have a choice, but they always have a choice. But they submit themselves to that. They've allowed themselves to fall into that. And so the law of influence is the offset, is the opposite side of that, which means you have the ability to influence, and that's how we are connected with spirit. When I connect with the spirit, they're using the law of influence to communicate to me so that I can understand the messages. So they're influencing what's happening within me, and I'm taking it and running with it. But if I were some person that was in fear or didn't think that I should be talking to spirits, I would be trying to shut them out, and I'd be trying to will myself to ignore them and to turn that off. But there's the law of will. So these are just like examples, but there's a law of influence. And so it goes into a lot more like specifics, but there are various laws that exist on this level and in this form. So I've been dictated these laws and I'm like writing them down. So that's going to be a part of like the spiritual book. And I think what else is going to be a part of the spiritual book is the practices, the behaviors, the exercises, the examples that we can do to align us with the version of ourselves that all these religions try to do, but don't do as effectively. And they throw in a bunch of dogma. And so it's more of like stripping it down and bringing it back to some of these basic things that all of us pretty much desire or are trying to do, we believe in, we just don't effectively do it. A majority of Christians are not compassionate, generous, giving people who focus on feeding the homeless or focus on helping children. Like majority of these people who call themselves this or that do not do activities on a regular basis. They show up to church on a Sunday. They clock in, get their credits, they clock out, they go home, and then they go back to being shitty ass people who don't have any idea what compassion truly means. And so you have a bunch of people who operate that way. And unfortunately, that's not going to help you be anything other than what you're being. But that book is going to be based on essentially how to live a life that is in alignment and integrity with what most religions try to do anyways. And so that book is going to be about the spiritual understanding, the concept, what we have to deal with on this form and in this level, and then how we can make the best of it and achieve, a loving, generous, compassionate life, a life of legacy. So that's what that book is about. And that's just another version. It's like, so that's what that's about. But I'm going into like a lot of detail, but I got to get off because I'm supposed to go make dinner and it's like time to go make dinner. So I got to like go and get to getting specific nuances. Oh yeah. Abraham has mentioned that there are more laws. Yes. So hungry for the spirituality book. I tried to put Tucker Carlson in a spell jar, but he still goes on because he serves a purpose. All of these people that some of us cannot stand or feel are an upfront to what they pretend to represent, they serve a purpose nonetheless. You can't understand the light until you understand the darkness. We all are dark beings in one way or another, and we are also light beings in one way or another. And to separate ourselves from each other as if some of us are good and some of us are evil, granted, there are some people who are really awful human beings who predominantly focus on being dark examples in this world. But we all still have the potential to be both. And, none of us are pure light. None of us are the purest form of goodness here. We're all human at the end of the day. Even Jesus, human. He went off on some folks. So, he he used the darkness within him to make a point about the light. So that's the way you do it. You use the darkness to make a point. And you do it so that you can achieve something positive in this world. And that's how you do it. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, Tina, yeah, I am there. Yeah, Christina, yeah, the class is filled up. So I'm not filled up. There's still openings for like people who want to like participate in the class, but the free spots, I've already gone ahead and given a couple of folks the free spots. So I did that actually today. Today was, and I forgot to announce that on the live. Thank you for reminding me, but I'll have to post that so people don't wonder what happened there. Absolutely. Yeah. So, all right, guys, I got to get off here because I'm hungry. So love you all. I will be back on